The award-winning film, The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain, is based on a real-life situation that took place on November 19th, 2011, when a 68-year-old former decorated Marine and former corrections officer was shot and killed by a White Plains policeman who came to his house for a wellness check early in the morning after his life alert system activated accidentally. Chamberlain had a heart problem and suffered with bipolar disorder. The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain, currently available on HBO Max, is a drama film written, produced, and directed by David Midell and stars one of our guests here, the incredible actor Frankie Faison. We're also joined by Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. Thanks to both of you for being here to talk about this important film and about this case.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Kenneth, first of all, my sincere sympathy for losing your father back in 2011. Can you explain, before we actually talk about this film, what your father was like and what his relationship was with you?
Well, you know, I always tell people father-son relationships are tricky because he's your first superhero. He's the guy that can fix everything when you're a young child, and then as you get older, after he's taught you the difference between right and wrong, he begins to make you understand what consequences are about. And you know, I think that's when, as I got older in my teen years, that, you know, of course, I did teenage things, but my father always supported me. He always stood by me, a man of integrity, a man of honor, someone who shouldn't have lost his life the way that he did.
There's a picture behind you in his Marine uniform. I would imagine you look at that picture every day.
Every day, every day. I have not mourned my father's death. 10 years later, I've still been fighting to get, I've stopped saying justice, but I fight now to get some type of accountability in his killing.
Yeah, we're going to talk to you about where, you know, there have been appeals and there have been various changes in looking into what actually happened on that day. And we'll talk about that in a bit. But Frankie, you won the Gotham Award for Outstanding Lead Actor for The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain, once again, currently on HBO Max. Like so many of your performances, so powerful. What was it about this role that you wanted to do this challenging and really unnerving film?
Well, as you know, Doug, I really gravitate towards stories that are very compelling and will draw an audience into it, and very character driven. And when I first received this script, it checked all the boxes. It was I didn't know the story. I didn't know the case, and I live about an hour away from White Plains. But just reading it, I was immediately drawn into this man's life, and I wanted to retell this story to the best of my ability. So just upon reading this magnificent script by David, and then talking about it a little bit, I just knew that it was an opportunity that I would not want to miss.
Kenneth, why do you feel, I know you've talked to people who have said this to you, I didn't know about this case until I saw this film. Why was the death of your father, why wasn't it bigger news that everybody knows in some of the cases that we've seen involving police and you know, simple citizens involved? Why wasn't this case more publicized?
Well, I mean, there's so many different ways that you can answer that. I think that as a society, we have become so desensitized when it comes to these types of issues around police misconduct, brutality, and criminality. People really didn't start waking up to situations like this until the killing of George Floyd. And that was because we were in the midst of a pandemic, and the world was, for lack of a better way of saying it, had stood still. So people were home and they were looking for things to do. So now everybody's eyes are glued to social media and they're watching a police officer place his knee on the neck of an individual and kill him. So now it's waking people up, and people began to see what people like myself have been talking about for years, that these things are happening, that they're not isolated incidents. But I think the city of White Plains did a good job at trying to cover it up, trying to sweep it under the rug, trying to make my father look like a suspect rather than a victim. So I think that's the primary reason why people never heard about it, or not that many people heard about it.
The thing that was so alarming as you watch this film is the fact that even at the end of the film, we hear the real clips of the tapes. You spoke to your dad several times before police actually broke down his door to enter his home. He recorded, you got the sense that he knew if they entered his home, something bad was going to happen. Even though police did tell him many times, we're not here to hurt you, according to as you watch the film. But you get this sense that, knowing the dynamic that you just spoke about, that something bad was going to happen to him. It's almost like he taped his own death, knowing that something was going to happen. Can you talk about that at all?
Well, I'll first say, on the day that my father was killed, I actually did not speak to my father. That is something that was just added into the film. I often tell people, they look at the film and they're in shock, and they say, oh my God, I can't believe this happened to your dad. But what I say to them is, what you saw on the film, what actually happened to my father was worse. I said, but we didn't add all of those things. So I didn't speak to him. I actually found out through a friend of mine who actually called me that morning and said, come to White Plains right away. And I said, why? He said, the police are banging on your father's door. And I said, well, why are they banging on his door? He said, I don't know, but you need to get out here right away. And then all of a sudden he just yelled out, oh my God. And I asked him what happened. And it was at that point where he said to me, I think police just shot your father. So I rushed to White Plains, and sure enough, the tape was up, and I asked the police officer what was going on. They advised me to go to the hospital. And when I arrived at the hospital, that's when I found out that he had expired.
Frankie, playing Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., you go through so many different emotions, psychologically, physically, in a short period of time. How do you prepare yourself for that kind of role? I mean, I've seen you take us to a slave ship, and when you did Reparation in Luna Stage back in 2012, it's a performance I'll never forget. This performance I will never forget either, because of the range of emotion that you go through as an actor, and knowing this person. There's so many aspects of this person's personality, past, the dynamic between police going into that apartment and having a feeling that anybody who lives there has to have some kind of issue. Take us into the mind of Kenneth Chamberlain as you were trying to portray him.
Well, the majority of that mindset comes from what was given to me on the written page by a tremendous writer, David Midell, who really captured the essence of this story and this man, this family, everything, every detail was just amazing. And from those details, I draw the life, or carve out a life, a story of what I think a person would be going through and dealing with. In the same way in which I just heard Kenneth Jr. say, now he may have told me this before, I don't know, but the way he described what just happened with the phone call and him being on the other end, and then all of a sudden his friend saying, oh my God, and he said, what happened? And he said, they just shot my father. It sent chills through my body just now hearing you say those words, Kenneth. I mean, it really did. And it's That's the kind of thing that I use as an actor. I use the truth of the moment. I'm a moment-to-moment kind of person. And the truth of the moment that's given to me on those pages to act and respond to, I use all the resources I have as an actor, all the training, all the life experiences, and I put into that single moment. And with each moment, I get a different result. So that's how, that's the landscape of how I drew this character up. And like I said, the best example to give is just those words I just heard from Kenneth Jr. just now. I mean, just anyone who can hear someone, a son, say that about a father, they have to be moved if they have a heart, because it's, you would never want to be on the other end of that line having that conversation. So that's, those are the things that I drew from the script and from this man and from this character, and the rest of it was just, it was simply doing my job.
We're speaking with Frankie Faison and Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. about the film on HBO Max, The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain. It took place in 2011 in White Plains. As I watched this film, I don't know if I was ever so anxious, concerned as this played out. You were in that apartment with Kenneth Sr. Everyone who watches this film felt like they were there because of how it was filmed and how it went down. He knew the law. He knew. He was a former corrections officer, a former decorated Marine. He knew his rights. And yet, still, it played out in this way. Kenneth, can you tell us, give us the backstory of the courts and the appeals and the civil case in a short summary, if you can, so people can understand. No charges were ever filed against the officers involved in this. And we had racial comments during this incident that were on tape for everyone to hear. And we know that through an autopsy, it certainly suggests that your father was on the floor when this took place. Can you give us a short summary? I know it's painful, but I would appreciate that.
Sure. So, of course, in November 2011, my father was shot and killed. The district attorney at that time, Janet D. Fior, did promise a full and fair investigation into the events leading to my father's death. But in May of 2012, she came back with no true bill in his killing. I always say that all these prosecutors seem to read from the same playbook. And we've heard it time and time again when they say that, you know, after a full and extensive investigation, the grand jury has determined that there's not sufficient enough evidence to charge the officer in the killing of, in this case, it was my father. So we then filed civilly to take the city of White Plains to court in federal proceedings. A lot of people think that it is about money when you do that, but that's so far from the truth. The reason you're doing that is because in most cases, you don't get convictions of officers. They're not charged. So you go there civilly because now you want to try to find out things that may or may not have been presented in court with the possibility of being able to have these officers charged again. But in 2016, I believe that they found for the city of White Plains, you know, it's been so long, I'm getting these years mixed up. But they came back in favor of the city of White Plains. We filed an appeal. And in 2020, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals overturned the original decision, allowing us to go back in court. And I say one of the most profound statements they made in the decision is that they said, instead of treating Mr. Chamberlain like a critically ill patient, you treated him like a criminal suspect. So they basically kicked it back, and they're telling the judge and they're telling, try again, because a lot of these rulings were very questionable. she took the bulk of our case that we were using to fight and she threw it out. She even implied that, you know, the racial slur that was hurled at my father was just a word. And just to backtrack real quick, when the district attorney, Janet DeFiore, who is now a New York State chief judge, when a reporter asked her, what about the racial slur that was hurled at Mr. Chamberlain before he was killed? She said, yes, it was used and it shouldn't be used by anyone, but it was used as a tactic to distract Mr. Chamberlain. You know, I had never in my life ever heard of a racial slur being used to distract someone. I mean, I tell people, if I use a racial slur with you and demand that you open the door, would you open it? I said, absolutely not. So last year, the current Westchester County District Attorney, Mimi Roca, is now taking a second look. She's reviewing the killing of my father. She's not giving any type of prejudgments or anything with the review, but she did say that anything, you know, past the review would be based on if the facts in the law warrant it. And we're talking about statute of limitations and things like that, because it's been 10 years. So looking at charges like maybe a manslaughter charge or things like that probably wouldn't happen. It would have to be deliberate and intentional murder that they would have to charge the officers with at this time.
And maybe you both can comment on this. As I'm watching the killing of Kenneth Chamberlain, the first thing I think most people will say is, please just open the door. But you do such a good job in this film of making us understand why he didn't open the door. And I don't know if we as viewers would all feel that way back in 2011 as much as we do in 2022 because of the things like George Floyd. Do you agree with that? Or do you find that we should always feel that way? But I felt myself, please just open the door. But then I totally understand what was going through his mind. I mean, partly because of Frankie's amazing performance, but partly because of his background and how he knows that something could end up bad here. Frankie, how about you first?
I'd be happy to tackle that question because it's a question that I have to tackle as an actor, performer, doing this role as well. I think that because he knew his rights, he was in his home, everything he did was in order, it was correct. And there was no reason in the world that, I think that maybe he had some fear of the fact that these are law enforcement officers. He had an encounter with one of them before, and they don't turn out well. And as long as you have the safety of being in your own home, you should feel safe. And it didn't play out that way. So I think that those were the things. And I think it also became more and more a tug of war between him and his rights and those law enforcement officers who refused to accept a civilian saying no to them because they have the power, they have the might, they have everything on their side. And he just, at this point in time, he chose not to open that door. And if it had been someone else, maybe they would have opened the door and say, okay, look, the door is open, come in, do what you do and just get out. But he did not want to just to give away his rights as a citizen because he knew them so well. And also because it's just something that we're all entitled to. But just because we're all entitled to it. Sometimes, you know, the old adage, they say, he who fights and runs away may live to see another day, comes into play. You know, had he just, maybe the worst case scenario is they may have beat him up, or they may have, you know, just called him more derogatory names or something like that and humiliated him and then left. But he did not want that. He was tired of that kind of treatment. He wanted what he was due by law. And he was, him being a Marine, an ex-Marine, and him also being Also, the fragile condition of his, from the war and from his health and all those. It was not he had health issues. And there are things, and there sometimes you just get to a point when you say, I've had enough. That's it. I'm going to make my stand right here, do or die. But you're not coming into my home. You cannot come into my home. And that I think that's the reason that he did not open that door.
And Kenneth, a lot of people could honestly say to someone like Doug Doyle, you can't possibly understand what was going through Kenneth Chamberlain Sr.'s mind at this point, because you have a different skin color. Your thoughts on the fact that that decision to not open the door, we certainly understand it.
So I'll first say that, my argument with people many times, or the dialogue that I have with people, is that we know that race and class play a role on how police officers respond to different situations. I said where my father lived is considered a low income, high crime area. So, but if you go down the block a little bit, make a right and go up about 5 or 6 blocks, you're in a town, village, or more affluent neighborhood where they certainly wouldn't have behaved in the manner that they did when they responded to my father's home. So that's one thing. Another thing is we, from looking at the movie and then looking at the actual facts of the case, which is available through Freedom of Information. So I always say that anything that I say pertaining to the killing of Kenneth Chamberlain is available through that. You can foil it and you can look that up yourself to see that what I'm saying is factual. A lot of people would say, why didn't he open the door? He did open the door. He just did not open the door for you to make entry into his apartment. But he opened the door and he said, I'm fine. I don't need you. So it was at that point that you should have gone away, but you didn't. And we know that a man's home is supposed to be his castle. And the 4th Amendment says that it is the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects from unreasonable search and seizure, and that no warrant shall issue without probable cause. There's only 3 times you can make entry: permission, warrant, exigent circumstances. You did not have any of those 3. So you should have just simply said, sorry to have disturbed you, sir. Have a good night or good morning, and leave, and just document it. And possibly my father would still be alive today.
The sympathetic police officer in this movie, was that based on the truth?
So I tell people what you saw was a fictional narrative based on true events. There was no Officer Rossi the day my father was killed. I wish there were, because maybe that Officer Rossi could have prevented what happened. That was thrown in to give the viewer another perspective, another side, a different type of understanding, to say, wow, why didn't they just listen to him? But it's the same thing, because when you hear the actual recordings, you hear officers say, do you have family? My cousin, Tanya, was right there. And she said, yes, I'm his niece. They would not allow her to speak to him. So there are so many times that this situation could have ended, it could have resolved itself, and everyone would be in a good place. But it goes back again to what you said, when you talk about skin color, race and class, white privilege, what's afforded to white people versus non-white people, and we are where we are today.
I'd like to make this point as well. About the door, him opening the door. And I think that it's been stated many times that when these officers got there, they treated him like he was a criminal rather than mental health issues, a person with mental health issues. And I think that if the police had better training, they could have found a way to maybe coerce him better, to opening the door rather than just combating him fist to fist and forcing it upon them. I think that in those moments, those are the moments that I think that they lost any hope of having Kenneth Chamberlain open that door, because they were, it's basically from point on, they're saying, we're coming in, open the door, that's it. Rather than having someone with training in mental health issues who would say, okay, well, let's look at it from this point of view, perspective. Let's like back away a little bit and come back at him soften, or let's bring up one of his relatives and have them. I mean, there were so many options that were available. But once you start strong arming someone and you push them back against the wall where they have no way other out than to just fight back, that's what happened to him. And that's why that door probably never got open without the force of the police force.
We just have 5 minutes to go. So I wanted to ask you, Frankie, has this been your most challenging role ever?
Everything that I do, I put 150% into the work, because that's my training. That's what I have been trained to do. But I think that this piece probably is the culmination of everything that I've learned as an actor over my over 50 years in this business, and of all my training, because it was something that it was so intense and forceful. I mean, I've had, supporting stuff that you do, you can do that kind of intensity for a short period of time, but you don't have to sustain it for the arc of the whole film. So I say in that way, it probably was the most demanding. And when I look back on it, not having any memory or recollection of anything that was going on during the process of filming this, I think that, yes, this engaged me in a way that I have never been engaged before in portraying a character.
As you mentioned, 5 decades in the entertainment industry, from Do the Right Thing, Coming to America, The Wire, so many things that you've been involved in. I talked about the plays that you've been in the area, your connection with Luna Stage through the years. Truly a powerful performance. And I rewatched the film this morning in preparation again for the interview, and I feel uneasy just talking to you, because I just saw you in that role, and you're still Kenneth Sr. to me right now. Kenneth Jr., as we wrap this up, people watching this film for the first time, it's not an easy film to watch. What do you want them to be thinking about as they watch The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain?
Well, I will say that many times people have heard me say justice for Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., but after a decade later, it's not about justice now. It's about accountability. Justice should be immediate, not carried out later. So, and my belief at this time that justice delayed is justice denied. So I'm hoping that with this film, and I've often say this in many interviews, that I want it to be a teaching tool. Let police academies and departments show this film and let them say that what you see in this film, you don't do this. This is what you don't do. And understand that your job is to diffuse a situation, not create one. So we have to build a culture of accountability within law enforcement. And if you do that, then you'll build trust between police and the communities. And outside of that, I just say that may there be accountability for Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., and may there be accountability for all families impacted by police violence.
One last question. Are you and Frankie close now after this film?
This is my new dad now, interestingly enough, somebody said to me, a very close friend of mine who I look at as a mother, she said, the police stole your father from you. They said, and now Frankie has stepped in and just assumed that role. He called me the other day, just to fully disclose, my mother passed away this Sunday. And Frankie called me immediately, just to hear my voice, just to check on me, just to make sure I was okay. So, I often, when I speak to him, I say, hey, Dad, You know.
Wow.
So
So sorry for your loss.
Yeah.
And the fact that my dad, who passed away in 2020 at the age of 90 in his sleep, former Marine like your dad, knowing that he was a Marine, touched me deeply. My dad had a much better fate next to his wife of 70 years. You lost your dad in a situation that just should never have happened. Kenneth Chamberlain Jr., the amazing actor Frankie Faison, thanks to you both for sharing this film with us and sharing your story. We appreciate it. Well done.
thank you.
Thank you so much.